A midnight call can change everything. Nate Whitaker, a CEO known for precision, control, and calendars that leave no room for error, hears 5 words that undo his entire world. Sir, you're listed as father, in a sterile hospital corridor. A tiny cry pierces the quiet, a life that belongs to him, yet feels impossibly distant. Meanwhile, Emily Hart, the woman who has quietly held life together in the small gestures no one notices, faces a choice that could redefine her future. A baby, a secret, a city that never slows down. What happens when the walls we build around our hearts are the very barriers to the love and courage we need? Can a man who thrives on power learn what it means to truly protect someone else? And can a woman who's always cared for others finally let herself be cared for in return? This is a story of quiet storms, unspoken truths, and the ordinary acts that become extraordinary when love demands courage. Join us as we follow Nate and Emily through the twists of life, loss, and the unexpected miracle of a child that changes everything. If you're ready to feel every heartbeat of this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's start the story together. A midnight call. A sterile hospital corridor. A tiny cry in the distance. Nathaniel Whitaker stood outside the glass door of the neonatal intensive care unit, his breath short, his chest tight. His hands trembled around the silver watch that had belonged to his grandfather. It ticked with ruthless precision, each second a reminder that time was moving forward whether he was ready or not. Inside, machines beeped softly, nurses moved with practiced calm, and then came the 5 words that shattered his composure. Sir, you're listed as father. He was not ready. His life was not ready. Control had been his armor for years, and control had just slipped through his fingers. Months earlier, Boston had been dressed in winter's sharp light. The Whitaker Tower, 40 floors of glass, steel, and ambition shone against the pale sky. Its lobby gleamed, all marble and silence. On the top floor, Nate's office reflected the city like a mirror. The skyline stretched endlessly, cold and orderly, the way he liked it. Calendars were color-coded. Meetings started on the minute and ended before the coffee cooled. His desk was spotless, pens aligned with military precision. Efficiency was his gospel. Numbers gave him certainty. Spreadsheets, not conversations, carried the weight of his days. People admired him. Investors trusted him. Employees feared disappointing him. And yet, behind his steel-gray eyes, there was little more than airless quiet. Emily Hart entered his life without ceremony, not with ambition, not with calculated charm. She simply arrived, quietly steady, filling small spaces he hadn't known were empty. On his desk one morning, a vase of hydrangeas appeared, delicate blue against the sterile glass walls. From the farmer's market, she said. When asked, another day. A note card rested atop his neatly stacked reports. Don't forget to call your mother on her birthday. The handwriting was round, careful, and kind. She never lingered, never pressed. She carried herself with dignity, as though even kindness had to respect boundaries. And yet, she unsettled him in ways success never could. At night, his penthouse in Back Bay gleamed like one of his hotels, polished hardwood, leather sofas, a kitchen that looked borrowed from a magazine. Everything staged, everything perfect, and nothing lived in. When he opened the refrigerator, rows of bottled water lined the shelves, untouched takeout containers pushed neatly to the back. Across the city, Emily's walk-up in Jamaica Plain told a different story. Narrow rooms, paint chipped at the corners, the hum of an old radiator working too hard. On the wall, a quilt stitched by her mother carried fading threads of family history. A grocery list clung to the refrigerator door, written in the same careful hand that reminded Nate about birthdays. There was warmth in the clutter, humanity in the imperfection. Motifs began to weave themselves through their days. The ticking clock on Nate's wrist, reminding him of order, but also of moments lost. Rain falling on Boston's old brick streets, polishing history rather than erasing it. The city itself, a place that rewarded speed and sharpness, but starved tenderness, casting long shadows on both of them. Nate thrived on speed. Emily survived by creating spaces of stillness. And slowly, he began to notice the stillness more. There was no dramatic twist in those early weeks, no scandal, no whispered gossip in the corridors of Whitaker Holdings. The reveal was quieter, more dangerous. For all his wealth, Nate's life was hollow, a shell polished to perfection. For all her modest means, Emily lived in a space filled with steadiness and care, her small gestures a flower, a reminder. A kind word pierced the armor he had built so carefully. He found himself pausing in the middle of endless board reports, the smell of hydrangeas still fresh in his mind. He caught himself looking forward to the faint hum of her footsteps outside his office door. He began to wonder when he had last let himself feel anything beyond achievement and loss. Boston's weather turned restless as February drew near. Forecasts warned of a heavy snowstorm, the kind that could shut down the city for days. People hurried to stockpile groceries, salt the sidewalks, and check their furnaces. Inside Whitaker Tower, however, the calendar marched on. Meetings remained fixed, deadlines pressed closer. No storm, no matter how fierce, had ever made Nate reschedule. His life did not bend. But storms, as Emily knew, were not only about surviving. They were about preparing, about keeping others safe. She folded extra quilts at home for her mother. She stocked their pantry with cans of soup, lined boots by the door, checked the batteries in the flashlight drawer. Nate believed storms were something to power through. Emily believed storms were something to shelter against. And in the weeks to come, he would learn what it meant when shelter was what he needed most. The richest man in the room could move markets with a sentence, a single nod, a clipped phrase, and millions shifted on screens across the world. But what steadied his day was something quieter. Not the numbers, not the analysts, not the headlines. It was the secretary's quiet competence. Emily Hart anticipated needs before he could name them. A briefing deck waiting neatly stacked. The figures checked twice. A protein bar left beside his laptop. Not announced, not offered with words, just placed there as if it had always belonged. When the floor emptied at dusk, and the glass walls reflected only fluorescent light, she left one lamp burning in his office, soft against the dark. She did not hover, she did not press. She simply kept things steady. Each evening, when the tower finally surrendered its last echoes, Emily returned to Jamaica Plain. She climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment, the air carrying the faint scent of her neighbor's cooking. Inside, warmth met her threadbare but alive. Her mother, Ruth, sat wrapped in an old cardigan, her joints swollen from arthritis. The pain was worse in winter, when Boston's damp cold settled deep. Emily heated water for tea, laid warm compresses across her mother's knees, and sorted bottles of medication into a pill organizer that clicked softly under her careful fingers. She asked about her Mother's Day, listened as Ruth spoke of small things, the radio program she liked, the neighbor who had stopped by with soup, the quilt squares she hoped to finish when her hands allowed. Emily's voice was gentle, a steadying current that filled the small apartment with calm. The world might measure power in towers and titles, but here, love was measured in teaspoons of sugar stirred into tea, in hands that smoothed the blanket, in presence that asked nothing in return. Back in the tower, Nate noticed what he was not meant to notice. The cadence of her voice on a client call, calm, professional, unflustered even when the client grew sharp. The way she never turned kindness into currency, never used it to curry favor or build leverage. Her gifts were small, almost invisible, but they were honest. He caught himself lingering too long when she handed him a report, watching the quiet precision of her movements. He wondered how often she thought of herself at all, when every gesture seemed to be about others. He told himself not to wonder. He told himself it did not matter. And yet, the wondering grew. The snowstorm arrived in late February, slow at first, then relentless. By dusk, Boston streets blurred white, headlights cutting through like weak candles. The tower emptied in waves, employees anxious to beat the storm, elevators filled with muffled coats, boots squeaking against marble. Emily moved quietly among them, arranging rides, calling car services for those who lived farther out, checking that no one was left stranded. She waited until the last desk light clicked off, until the office was silent except for the hum of the heating system straining against the cold. She gathered her scarf, looped it around her neck, and turned to secure the floor. Nate had remained in his office, the city below vanishing in snow. He watched the patterns form on the window, white and shifting. When Emily passed his door, he opened his mouth to thank her. The words pressed against his throat but did not form. He had given speeches to thousands. He had negotiated with billionaires. Yet simple thanks felt impossibly heavy. Instead, he lingered at the window. Through the glass, he saw her step into the plaza, scarf pulled tight, head bent against the storm. The streetlights cast halos of snow around her. For a moment, she looked impossibly small, fragile even, crossing a world built for men like him. And something inside him cracked, not enough for collapse, just a hairline fracture, the kind that lets light in before it grows wider. The storm raged on through the night, blanketing Boston in silence. By morning, plows carved narrow paths, but the city struggled to rise from its enforced stillness. Nate's calendar, however, had no sympathy. Tomorrow would bring a civic gala, an event he dreaded. A speech written by his communications team waited on his desk, words that felt hollow even before he read them. More than the speech, there was the presence of an old friend, a man whose trust he could not afford to lose. Nate told himself that was what mattered, the speech, the alliance, the deal, and yet, the image that remained with him was not of balance sheets or contracts. It was of Emily, her scarf drawn close, her figure moving steadily through the snow. Some hearts do not open with fireworks. They open with small rituals, a light left on in an office too large, a bowl of clementines on a counter, a calendar discreetly blocked for a grief he pretends he does not feel. The community center in Roxbury smelled faintly of old gym floors and fresh coffee. Once a year, Whitaker Holdings sponsored a charity day there, half photo opportunity, half tax write-off. Nate had always treated it as an obligation. A drive-by appearance, a speech drafted by his team, a handshake with the director before slipping back into his car. This time was meant to be the same. Yet, when he arrived, something shifted. Emily was there, clipboard in hand, moving through the chaos with calm precision. She directed volunteers to the right tables, passed out gloves for food distribution, tied aprons around teenagers too shy to ask for help. She did not stand at the front or seek recognition. She worked steadily, her hair pulled back, her sleeves rolled up. Nate intended to leave after the obligatory photos. He stayed. At one point, a child tugged at his sleeve, pointing to the stack of donated books. Without thinking, Nate crouched down, picked one up, and read aloud the title. The boy grinned, toothy and unguarded. Something broke loose in Nate's chest, and before he realized it, he was laughing. A volunteer snapped a candid photo, his suit rumpled, tie askew, joy on his face. It startled him later to see it. He almost did not recognize himself. At home in Jamaica Plain, Emily's life was quieter but heavier. She kept private lists folded in her purse co-pays for her mother's medication. Grocery sales circled in red, reminders to stretch each paycheck further than it wanted to go. There were lists that never left the drawer of her nightstand, written in a softer hand, dreams, small ones, a spring trip to the ocean with her mother, to stand on the Maine coast, let the salt wind wash away months of pain, to watch her mother's eyes light up at the sight of waves breaking against rocks. She tucked those dreams away, as though keeping them folded small would protect them. Nate's nights unfolded differently. Treadmill, emails, silence. His penthouse glowed against the Boston skyline, but inside it felt stripped of air. The refrigerator held bottled water, a row of untouched apples, takeout containers lined like soldiers. He poured himself whiskey sometimes, more often black coffee, as if one could cancel the other. On his desk sat an old postcard he had never mailed, a photograph of the Maine coast, jagged rocks, a lighthouse standing against wind. Years ago, he had bought it with the intention of sending it to someone. He never decided who. He kept it anyway, a relic of an impulse toward connection that had frozen before reaching anyone's mailbox. Warmth crept in through smaller doors. Emily adjusted the framed cityscape on his credenza. It had always displayed the skyline at dusk, towers lit and proud. She rotated it almost absent-mindedly to the sunrise version tucked behind. The same buildings bathed in morning light. The same glass reflecting possibility instead of fatigue. Nate noticed it days later. He could not name what felt different, only that the office seemed less severe, kinder. Somehow, he found himself looking toward the frame in long meetings, as if it carried a reminder of something he had misplaced. The charity event ended with the scrape of folding chairs on the gym floor. Volunteers peeled off gloves, stacked empty trays, laughed in small, tired bursts. Nate, to his own surprise, did not retreat to the waiting car. He stayed. He took off his jacket, loosened his tie, and carried chairs to the side of the room. Emily caught sight of him, eyebrows raised slightly. She said nothing, but her eyes softened. For the first time, she glimpsed the man beneath the polished suit, the one willing to stack chairs with strangers. It was a fleeting glimpse, but it lingered. That evening, an invitation landed on Nate's desk. Heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, a civic gala honoring Marion Pierce, his mentor. Marion had been more than a colleague, almost family, a man who had guided him through the earliest years of his career, who had steadied him after his father's death. The thought of attending made Nate's chest tighten. Speeches, spotlights, conversations that skimmed surfaces but never touched truth. He considered declining. For once, he imagined letting a calendar line go empty. But Marion mattered, and so did the appearance of loyalty. He would go, he would wear the suit, stand at the podium, and do what was expected. What he did not admit, not even to himself, was that a small part of him wanted Emily there, somewhere in the crowd. Not as a secretary, not as an assistant, but as someone who made the unbearable less so. The gala shimmered under chandeliers, every surface polished to impress. Strings played softly, glasses chimed, and conversations floated like silk. Nate stood where he always did, center of influence, shoulders squared, his expression the calm mask he had mastered. He had given his speech, shaken hands, nodded at investors who measured loyalty in appearances. He told himself it was enough. Then came the call. A vibration against his pocket, insistent against the hum of violins. Marion Pierce had collapsed. Stroke. Boston General. Critical. The chandeliers blurred. The music thinned. The room did not matter anymore. Emily found him by the coat room. His hand was clenched around his phone, his jaw tight, but his eyes betrayed something unfamiliar, fear stripped of control. "I'll come with you," she said simply. No hesitation, no question about boundaries, just presence. The hospital was a labyrinth of fluorescent light and antiseptic air, directions given in low voices, elevators sighing open, then shutting again. Emily moved through it with quiet competence, securing paperwork, making calls, gently guiding Nate when his steps faltered. They ended up in the waiting area, outside the intensive care unit. Vending machines hummed, their glow garish against pale walls. The aquarium flicker of monitors washed through the glass doors, punctuated by the steady rise and fall of machines breathing for a man who had once been larger than life. Nate sat rigid, elbows on his knees, winding and unwinding the strap of his mother's silver watch. The sound of its buckle snapping open, then clicking shut, became the only rhythm he could hear. Emily brought him coffee from the machine. It tasted burnt, metallic, but he drank it anyway. They sat side by side, not speaking, because some silences are too full for words. Dawn arrived without mercy. Light seeped through blinds, pale and indifferent. A doctor approached, his expression already telling the truth. Marion was gone. The words landed like stones. For years, Marion had been mentor, anchor, almost family. A man who taught Nate how to hold his ground in boardrooms, who reminded him that strategy meant nothing without trust. And now, he was gone, stolen in the space of one winter night. Nate's chest constricted. He tried to stand, then sat again, as if his legs had forgotten how to hold him. Emily placed her hand lightly on his arm, just enough pressure to remind him he was not entirely alone. Outside, the city looked scrubbed clean, the streets gleaming with the fresh promise of morning. Inside, something in Nate cracked, and the soundless break echoed louder than any siren. They returned to Whitaker Tower before sunrise. The building was hollow in the early hour, lights still dim, the city stretching pale beyond its glass walls. Nate unlocked his office with movements that felt mechanical. He set down his coat, the watch, the phone that still carried missed calls and condolences he couldn't bear to read. He stared at the skyline, at the dawn Marion would never see. Emily lingered by the door, unsure whether to stay or leave. The distance between them had always been measured, professional, precise, but grief does not obey walls. Nate turned, and the look on his face was not one she had ever seen. It was raw, unguarded, a man stripped of every layer of polish. His voice, when it came, was hoarse. "I don't know how to do this." Emily stepped forward, not because she had answers, she had none, but because some things required presence more than solutions. One step, then another, until they stood too close for rules to hold. The moment unfolded slowly, as if time itself had paused. He reached for her hand, tentative, as if testing whether she was real. She did not pull away. His breath trembled, hers caught, and then grief folded them together. It was not desire that drove it, not romance. It was the collision of two careful lives undone by loss. He leaned into her presence, the only steady thing in a world that had just shifted. She let him, even as she knew the cost. In his office, where the city's tallest tower had always represented control, Nate finally lost it. And in losing it, he found himself reaching for Emily. They crossed a boundary neither could uncross. Not passion, but solace. Not strategy, but survival. Their hands clung too tightly, their heads bowed as if in prayer. For a few stolen hours, grief made them reckless. Morning arrived with its blunt edges. Sunlight spilled across the skyline, relentless and bright. Policy waited, fear waited. Consequences sharpened in the shadows. Nate pulled on his jacket, the mask of control returning, though imperfectly. Emily smoothed her blouse, her face flushed with something that was not entirely sorrow. They did not speak of what had happened. They could not. But the silence carried weight, and in that silence, both knew nothing would ever be the same. Fear speaks fluent policy. It prints clauses, sets conditions, drafts language sharp enough to wound. It builds paper shields around a heart that only ever needed a hand. Morning after the vigil, Nate sat at his desk, the skyline pale against the frost of dawn. His office was immaculate again, as if the night before had been erased. Only his reflection in the glass betrayed what had happened. He called the moment with Emily a lapse, not a confession, not a bond, just a break in judgment, softened by grief. That was how he wrote it in his head, neat lines that could be folded away. The legal part of his mind took over. He sketched clauses on a yellow pad, confidentiality agreements, non-disclosure language, protections against scandal, against her, against himself. He never sent them, but he lived as though he had. Emily arrived that morning on time, as always. She carried the day's schedule, handed it to him with the same steady eyes. No favors asked, no access implied. She wore dignity like armor, refusing to let last night change the way she moved through the office. Meetings filled the hours, but they did not feel the same. The easy rituals were gone. No vase of hydrangeas appeared on his desk. No quiet lamp glowed against the dusk when he lingered too long. Silence stretched where small kindness had once lived. The chill seeped beyond his office. The chief of staff began to route tasks that once landed on Emily's desk. People noticed the shift, but said nothing aloud. Screens flickered with gossip in the form of private messages. A secretary who left the gala early. A CEO who looked unsteady the next morning. Emily kept her posture steady, her eyes clear, her work exact. But there was an absence in her steps, a softness withdrawn. She drafted her letter of resignation with the same careful hand that once reminded him of birthdays. One page, simple, respectful. She expressed gratitude for the opportunities, wished the team well, left no trace of bitterness. Her last day came without fanfare. She packed her desk into a single box, a small plant, a stack of neatly labeled files, a note of thanks left for her colleagues. Nate stood in his office, watching from behind glass as she walked to the elevator. He could have stepped out. He could have said something, anything. But fear held him still. The elevator doors closed with a quiet click, and she was gone. His assistant placed the resignation letter on his desk for signature. He stared at the paper longer than necessary. His hand trembled when he picked up the pen. He told himself it was the caffeine, the aftershock of too much black coffee. He signed anyway, a single motion, final. Something inside him recoiled at the permanence. But the line was drawn. By evening, her chair was empty, her desk lamp cold. The space where hydrangeas once stood bare. His calendar, so carefully constructed, suddenly gaped with white space. Meetings that once began with a soft word now started with silence. Something essential had left the building. 2 pink lines on a plastic window. They appeared quietly, without drama, as if the universe itself had whispered, "A miracle does not ask for permission. It asks for courage." The first signs had been easy to dismiss. Nausea near the copier, the hum of the machine blending with the rush of bile that left her gripping the counter until it passed. Dizzy spells on the stairwell, when she had to pause halfway, pretending to check her phone until the world steadied again. Fatigue that turned evenings into early bedtimes. Her mother fussing over her, unaware of the real reason. Emily bought the test on a cold Saturday morning, slipping it into her basket between milk and bread, her scarf pulled high against the wind. She carried it home in silence, her heart knocking against her ribs. In the small bathroom, tiles cracked with age, she waited, seconds stretching into years. 2 lines, clear, unmistakable. Her hands trembled. She pressed her back against the door, sliding down until she sat on the floor, knees pulled to her chest. A tear slipped before she could stop it, not of regret, not exactly fear, but the sheer weight of what this meant. By nightfall, she had a list. Emily always made lists. They steadied her when life tilted. This one was titled, "I Can Do This." Rent with margin. Prenatal vitamins. Safer housing, if possible. Her mother's appointments, non-negotiable. Baby supplies, crib, blankets, bottles, savings plan, however small. She folded the paper carefully, tucked it into her journal beside grocery coupons and utility reminders. The word alone hovered at the edges of the page, but she did not write it. She would not give it that power. She intended to tell Nate herself, quietly, privately, not to ask for anything, but because truth mattered. She had rehearsed the words in her head steady, factual, leaving no space for misunderstanding. But words have a way of escaping one's control. Victor Lang, the CFO, always had an ear for rumor and a taste for using it. He noticed Emily's paler face, her early departures for clinic visits, the way she touched her stomach absent-mindedly. He fed whispers to a few board members, weaving speculation into strategy. The talk grew louder in private halls, carried on digital threads Nate had no patience for but could not ignore. The implication was clear scandal, exposure, risk. When Nate confronted Emily, it was not with tenderness. It was with fear dressed as formality. He closed the office door. He spoke in the voice he reserved for negotiations, careful, detached. He asked questions framed as due diligence. Are you certain? Is there a chance this isn't? Each word was a blade. Her face did not flinch, though her stomach nodded. She answered with calm, though her heart thundered. Yes, I am certain. And then she stopped speaking because she understood what was really being asked, not for facts, but for distance, for reassurance that he could doubt her without consequence. Something sacred broke in that silence. Later, a settlement offer appeared, discreetly worded, generous on paper. Protection for her. Protection for him. Clauses written to smooth headlines and silence questions. Emily read it once, then folded it back into the envelope. She did not need hush money. She did not need protection built on distrust. She needed dignity, and she would not trade it away. She packed quietly, one suitcase, some boxes, her mother's quilt, her journals, the folded list that had become her compass. Her resignation had already been accepted weeks earlier. Now she closed the chapter for good. She arranged for care transfers for her mother, spoke with neighbors, mapped the clinic options near the coast, every step practical, every detail deliberate. The night before she left Boston, she stood at her window, looking out at the city that had both given her work and taken her peace. The lights sparkled, indifferent. She whispered a promise to the child she carried. We will be okay. Across town, Nate stood at his own window, the city reflecting back at him like a mirror. He saw his own face in the glass, hard lines, tired eyes, and the emptiness behind them. The board murmured about stability. Investors asked for reassurance. His calendar filled as if nothing had shifted. But inside, he could not silence the image of Emily walking away, carrying more than just herself. Boston moved on, trains running, markets opening, towers gleaming. His heart did not. When a city becomes too loud to hear your own heart, you drive until the air tastes like salt and your breath steadies. Emily left Boston behind with 2 suitcases, a few cardboard boxes, and her mother's quilt folded carefully on top. The drive north to Rockport wound along the coast, the winter sky wide and gray, the Atlantic restless beside the road. Each mile pulled her farther from the towers of glass and closer to something quieter, though not easier. The apartment she rented sat above a hardware store, its upstairs windows looking out toward the harbor. The stairs creaked beneath her feet, the paint peeled around the railing, but the space was hers. 2 rooms, slanted ceilings, a kitchen small enough that she could reach the sink, stove, and counter without moving more than a step. When she opened the window, the smell of salt blew in, mingled with the cries of gulls and the distant clang of a buoy bell. It was not luxury, but it was honest. Work came quickly, though not in the form she once knew. The harbor diner needed hands, and Emily was willing. Mornings smelled of coffee and frying bacon, afternoons of chowder and buttered rolls. She wore an apron instead of a blazer, carried plates instead of briefing decks. The rhythm was steady pour, serve, clear, repeat, and the wages just enough to stretch. Her mother settled nearby, under the care of a small clinic where the staff greeted patients by name. Ruth received kindness in practical ways. A casserole left on their porch by a neighbor, a crocheted baby blanket delivered with a smile, a ride offered during bad weather by the woman downstairs who owned the store. The community was not glamorous, but it was present, and presence mattered. Emily prepared for the baby with the discipline of someone who could not afford mistakes. On a clothesline strung across their narrow porch, baby clothes bought secondhand fluttered in the sea breeze. She washed them carefully, clipped them with wooden pins, and watched them dance like tiny flags against the horizon. She found a cradle in a thrift shop, its wood worn smooth by years of rocking. She sanded it gently, polished it, lined it with soft fabric she stitched by hand. The pantry filled with beans, rice, pasta, and canned tomatoes, simple staples that could stretch across weeks. She clipped coupons, tracked sales, and made lists with her usual quiet determination. Each small act of nesting became a promise. You will be safe, you will be cared for. Nate, meanwhile, remained in Boston. His days were still bound to the tower, to conference calls and board votes. But something in him had shifted. He had begun therapy, sitting across from a quiet man in a leather chair who asked questions that made him ache, questions about control, about fear, about the cost of building walls too high to climb down from. On some evenings, when the city felt unbearable, he drove north, the highway unspooled in front of him, his hands tight around the wheel, the same postcard image of the Maine coast echoing in his mind. One night, he parked 2 streets away from Emily's flat. He stayed in the car, engine idling, watching the warm glow of her porch light through the fog. He imagined climbing the steps, knocking, asking nothing but a moment to see her, to say something human. His hand rested on the door handle. His chest tightened with words unspoken. But fear won, fear of what she would say, fear of the line he had already crossed and the wound he had already made. So, he stayed in the car until the light inside flicked off. Then he turned the wheel and drove back south, the salt air fading from his lungs before he reached the city. No sharp twist marked this season, only the ache of parallel lives. 2 people moving forward on different tracks, loud with what-ifs. Emily's world was filled with thrifted cradles, casseroles left by neighbors, and the steady rhythm of waves against rocks. Nate's was filled with therapy notes, corporate strategy, and the echo of an empty office where hydrangeas once stood. Each carried the absence of the other like a weight, invisible to those around them, but constant in their own hearts. By late spring, the forecasts turned grim. A nor'easter was forming, strong enough to carve into the coastline. The ocean did not ask permission to rise, and neither did life. Some apologies arrive as drafts. Some courage is measured by the number of times you show up anyway. Therapy did not come naturally to Nate. He entered the quiet office like a man walking into a negotiation, shoulders stiff, face unreadable. The therapist asked simple questions. Where did you learn that love was conditional? And silence filled the room before words came. Over time, the sessions uncovered an old script. A boy praised for straight A's but ignored when he wept. A teenager rewarded for discipline, not honesty. A man who came to believe affection had to be earned, performance the only currency of worth. Control, he realized, had been his counterfeit for love. He had built an empire on it, but it left him cold. Something in him shifted, small, steady, almost invisible at first. At Whitaker Holdings, reforms appeared on board agendas, expanded parental leave, childcare stipends, travel aid for families seeking medical care. The board bristled. Investors questioned the expense, but Nate stood firm, repeating the same quiet conviction. We build infrastructure for communities. Families are the foundation of every community. His voice no longer carried the sharp edge of command. It carried persistence instead. Meetings stretched long, resistance lingered, but slowly. One policy after another passed. For the first time, he used power not as armor, but as shelter. At night, alone in his penthouse, he wrote letters. Emily, I'm sorry I doubted what should never have been questioned. Another draft. You deserve my trust. You deserve my courage. I gave you neither. Another still. If you never forgive me, I will understand, but I will not stop hoping. The pages piled up, tucked into a drawer, unsent. His handwriting grew less formal with each attempt, the lines truer, the sentences shorter. Sometimes he crossed out whole paragraphs, leaving only a single sentence behind. I miss the hydrangeas. I miss you. Meanwhile, Emily attended prenatal classes alone at the small clinic near Rockport. The walls were painted seafoam green, the chairs mismatched but comfortable. Other mothers arrived with partners, carrying notebooks and nervous smiles. Emily sat quietly, hand on her belly, taking notes in careful script. A volunteer doula noticed her and sat beside her. She offered small tips: how to breathe through early contractions, how to pack a hospital bag, how to trust the rhythm of her own body. The kindness carried no judgment, only presence. At home, Emily packed a bag weeks early, a nightgown, baby clothes washed and folded, a blanket crocheted by her neighbor, a folder of medical papers. She placed the bag by the door, checked it twice a week, and whispered to herself, "Be ready, be steady." The weather forecast flickered in the background of her evenings, storm patterns curling across maps, lines of warnings scrolling across the bottom of the screen. She circled dates in her calendar, just in case. The climax of this season was quiet, but real. Nate, who once hid behind clauses and contracts, now funded cribs for employees, rewrote leave policies, and created a culture where no one had to fear what Emily had endured. His change was not in speeches or grand gestures. It was in signatures on policies, in board minutes, in small victories that rippled outward. He had once failed the person who mattered most. Now he tried, in every quiet reform, not to fail others. Yet his letters remained unsent. His car stayed parked miles away from Rockport. His apologies lived only on paper. Emily, folding baby clothes by the line, felt the ache of absence but kept her focus steady. The child inside her demanded presence, not longing. She gave what she could: stability, care, dignity. By late spring, the forecasts grew sharper. A nor'easter was no longer a possibility, but a certainty. The clinic posted emergency procedures on its bulletin board: numbers to call, backup routes, guidelines for mothers near term. Emily traced her finger down the sheet, memorizing every line. At home, the bag by the door waited. Life, like the sea outside her window, did not wait for permission. Labor begins with the first hard breath. Emily presses a hand to her belly, feeling a tightening that makes her knees tremble. Outside, the nor'easter has arrived early. Rain lashes the windshield. Wind shakes the small sedan. The roads glisten like glass, reflecting streetlights in a blur. She grips the wheel tighter. The heater struggles against the damp cold. Each breath pulls more sharply, each contraction harder to ignore. She counts the seconds between them, trying to keep her mind focused on the road. The old car fishtails on a puddle. Her stomach drops. Tires scream against the slick asphalt. She pumps the brake gently, then pulls the car onto the shoulder. The shoulder is gravel and mud, uneven, but it buys her a moment of safety. In the distance, a red light blinks a volunteer fire station. Emily climbs out, shoes soaked, coat clinging to her back. The wind bites at her ears, but the door opens before she can knock. EMTs rush toward her, umbrellas bent by wind. She leans against the hood, trembling. They recognize urgency in her posture and do not speak, only act. A stretcher is unfolded. They lift her carefully, securing her in a van for transfer. The hospital surge is immediate. She is wheeled through antiseptic brightness, blue drapes snapping in the air from swinging doors. Nurses' voices mix with the distant wail of sirens outside, the soft hiss of air from monitors. The NICU team assembles at the end of the hall, crisp in scrubs, gloves snapping as they prep instruments and carts. Her doula appears, soaked from the same storm, hair plastered to her forehead, eyes bright. She reaches Emily, guiding her hand to steady each breath, whispering instructions that feel like a lifeline. "We are ready," she says, a lighthouse in human form, standing calm against chaos. Emily clenches her eyes shut as another contraction ripples through her. She trusts the doula to measure, to pace. She trusts herself to breathe, though fear presses like an ocean against her chest. At 2:47 a.m., Nate's phone vibrates violently against the dashboard of his sedan. His hand trembles as he reads the message: Emily Hart Labor Complications Hospital. The storm has turned the city into a river of headlights. He drives through sheets of rain, knuckles white, vision narrowed, heart hammering. Every light on the road flashes like a warning, every honk a pulse of panic. He feels the weight of months, of lost chances, pressing him toward the unknown. He reaches the hospital, mud-spattered shoes slipping on the tile floor. A nurse guides him to a door marked Maternity Emergency. He sees Emily briefly, stretched along a gurney, a face wet from rain and effort. Her eyes meet his. There is a flash of fear, but also recognition. They do not speak. They do not need to. Inside the operating suite, fetal distress triggers an emergency C-section. Emily's hand tightens around the rails, the doula at her side murmuring encouragement. Surgeons and nurses move with swift precision. The smell of iodine stings, the hum of machines sharp and steady. Nate stands behind a glass partition, feeling helpless. The policies, the contracts, the corporate shields stripped away in a single glance. Every tick of the clock stretches long, every breath pulls thin. Emily is measured, monitored, directed. Nate holds nothing but his own fear, pacing, shifting, praying in silence. The world contracts. The NICU incubator awaits a life so fragile that even the air seems to tremble. And then, the first cry. Thin as a thread, the cry is a bridge, a pivot, a reckoning. Nate hears it and collapses not to the floor, but to truth itself. His hands fall from his face. The world, in that instant, contains nothing but this tiny voice, this new life. Policy no longer matters. Performance no longer matters. Only love remains. Emily, exhausted but awake, hears Nate's breath hitch, sees his eyes widen behind the mask of a man who always commanded control. She recognizes surrender, recognition, and perhaps forgiveness, all mingled in a glance. The infant is lifted, swaddled in warmth and towels. Nate approaches, unsure, careful, eyes wide. He reaches for a tiny hand. The skin is soft, the fingers curling instinctively around his own. Every fear, every misstep, every lost month collapses in a heartbeat. Machines beep, alarms echo softly, monitors humming in rhythm with a fragile life. The storm outside begins to move on, the wind easing, rain tapering. Inside, however, a different kind of weather forms awe, wonder, relief, and the slow thaw of hearts long locked. The NICU team checks vitals, confirms breathing, notes fragile pulses. But Nate and Emily only see each other and the child, a bridge spanning months of silence, doubt, and distance. Hands shake, voices tremble, eyes glisten. Nate's lips part, but no words come yet. He simply allows himself to feel. Emily's lips curve into a faint smile of exhaustion and relief. The storm outside no longer dictates the pace inside. They watch together. The cry persists, resilient, human, miraculous. The night holds its own magic. Outside, the wind drags clouds across the moon. Inside, the room glows with human presence, care, and new beginnings. Every line in the sand that fear drew seems washed away by something older and stronger. Life. Emily rests, breathing long, watching Nate's careful hands cradle their child. He is silent but present, learning, feeling, surrendering to what matters. A pause, then a soft inhale together, a shared recognition of what has been earned through struggle, storms, and patience. The infant sleeps briefly, nestled between blankets, swaddled securely, the first of many nights they will face together. The morning light comes pale through the NICU windows. Nate pauses at the hand sanitizer station before entering. He wipes his hands slowly, deliberately, each motion a ritual of care he never thought he'd practice. Inside, the rhythmic beeping of monitors surrounds him, a gentle metronome for his new awareness. He steps carefully, not wanting to disrupt the quiet concentration that has kept Emily and their child safe. He learns the words of this world as if studying a new language. Apnea, oxygen saturation, gavage terms once foreign, now essential. Each syllable carries weight, but also the power to be present, to participate, to honor life that depends on him. He times his day to the feeding schedule, memorizing small routines. He notices the way Emily pauses to soothe, how she rocks their child's tiny body against her chest, whispering notes of reassurance. He marvels at the tenderness, feeling it seep into him, like water finding cracks in stone. The legal cleanup proceeds quietly, meticulously. Nate does not dominate, he listens. Privacy protections for Emily are written clearly, intentionally, so no outsider can infringe upon her autonomy. The CFO who spread whispers is held accountable, yet there is no spectacle, only careful correction. Policies shift board, culture resets toward respect, toward awareness that people's lives matter more than stock prices. Each document signed, each word reviewed, is a step in a larger repair, a private apology rendered visible through action. Housing becomes another act of tangible care. A modest Boston row house, just blocks from the hospital, is chosen with Emily's input. Rooms are measured, light noted, steps minimized. Nurses rotate on schedule, respecting Emily's space while supporting her and the infant. Written terms ensure Emily's voice governs the home, her choice is honored in ways Nate had never imagined possible. Each delivery of groceries, each installation of ramps and safety gates, speaks more loudly than any letter he had drafted but never sent. Ruth, Emily's mother, meets Nate on the porch one chilly morning. Gloves hug his hands, a bag of staples balanced carefully beside him. He speaks little, letting the reliability of his actions outweigh charm or speeches. He demonstrates understanding, not authority. A thermos of tea, a careful placement of medications, a measured glance toward the baby monitor. Trust begins its slow, halting growth in her eyes. She nods once, faintly, the gesture light but profound. Inside, the home is quiet but alive with careful rituals. Nate and Emily move in measured steps around each other, yet the silence is no longer sharp or tense. Emily places the baby on the changing table. Nate adjusts a blanket, folds it precisely, hands brush briefly, incidental and grounding. The days fold into one another, diaper changes, bottle preparations, soft hums of encouragement. Each repetition builds connection, an unspoken narrative of dependability. Weeks pass, Nate's presence becomes a constant. He is there for early morning feedings and late-night vigilances, adjusting oxygen lines and monitoring temperatures with a steadiness he never afforded himself in the corporate world. Letters he never mailed are replaced with lived actions sitting by the incubator, timing feedings, speaking softly to both mother and child. The weight of months of absence presses lightly now, only as a memory, softened by the texture of these new routines. Emily observes quietly. She sees him learning not just procedures, but patience, humility, and awareness. His once steel-gray eyes reflect concern, empathy, and quiet triumph over himself. The first time he rocks the infant without instruction, her gaze lingers on him longer than necessary. She does not speak. She allows observation to serve as acknowledgement, a private approval. Trust roots slowly in the soil of reliability. The row house itself becomes a stage for healing. The smell of boiled oatmeal mingles with fresh sheets drying by the radiator. Nate sweeps floors while Emily folds laundry, the sound of their domestic rhythm a subtle symphony. Outside, winter light strikes the brick, casting long shadows into the kitchen where bottles cool and diapers are stacked. The home feels alive without grandeur, filled with the honest cadence of human effort. Nate's apologies are small but repeated, each instance of showing up bringing coffee to the night nurse, carrying a stack of clean swaddles. Checking temperatures speaks louder than words ever could. The long apology is built from repetition, from constancy, from deeds small and large. There is no drama, no fanfare, only the gradual accumulation of proof that he is learning to own his failures and to choose work that matters beyond profit. Evenings are soft with the glow of lamps. Nate sits beside Emily on the couch after long shifts, fingers brushing absent-mindedly against her hand while the infant sleeps. They share quiet conversation, practical notes about feeding, health, and schedules. Laughter emerges slowly, tentative, as Nate recounts a misstep with a monitor or a diaper change. These moments, seemingly trivial, carry weight far heavier than any public apology ever could. Hope begins to take tangible shape. A discharge date looms. A car seat waits in the corner, polished and carefully checked, Nate folds instructions, rereads policies, and practices holding their child, mindful of each fragile joint, each breath. Emily watches, a quiet acknowledgement of growth, a recognition that the man who once built walls around his heart is now building a bridge toward them. Outside, Boston moves with its usual rhythm, traffic lights blink. Early commuters rush through wet streets, wind pulls at hats and coats. Inside, the long apology continues, minute by minute, day by day, in every act of attention and care. Trust grows in the small spaces: a hand held, a blanket tucked, a bottle prepared on time. These actions, mundane yet sacred, mark the slow recovery of connection and the forging of new beginnings. The city offers no pause, but in the small row house, among antiseptic supplies, folded linens, and the persistent rhythm of infant breathing, a different tempo prevails, one of reconciliation, responsibility, and human attentiveness. Every small gesture, every repeated act of reliability is Nate's way of saying, silently, unequivocally, I am here, I will remain, I will learn. Weeks into this rhythm, the quiet shock settles in trust. Once scorched and brittle, now finds roots, not in words, not in grand declarations, but in repeated presence, in fidelity to small acts, in shared attention to the fragile and the urgent. The apology that matters is lived, witnessed, and returned with cautious acknowledgement. Outside, the winter sun reflects off slanted windows. Inside, Nate adjusts the monitor. Emily folds a tiny blanket, and the child sleeps between them. The long apology has become ordinary, and yet, ordinary never felt so essential, so full of weight and promise. A discharge looms, the car seat, the careful packing, the repeated reminders all signal a next stage. But for now, they remain within these walls, tending to life, tending to each other. The morning sun filters through the Craftsman windows in Portsmouth, catching the pine floors and dust motes suspended in warm shafts of light. Nate shifts the baby in the car seat, the tiny hat pulled low over the soft hair, ensuring it stays snug against the chill. Emily stands nearby, hands on her hips, offering quiet guidance without a word. The nurses from the NICU wave, smiling like family, their gestures lingering longer than professional courtesy. It is discharge day, but more than that, it is the first ordinary morning of their life together. Boxes of blankets and clothes fill corners of the living room, a patchwork of months spent learning, adjusting, and surviving. The baby stirs, small fingers curling around the edge of a swaddle, tiny breaths measured and steady. Nate rocks the stroller gently, testing the springs on the wooden floors, listening to the soft creak that becomes oddly comforting. Emily arranges the diapers and bottles nearby, the routine itself becoming an act of love. The Craftsman house is restored with care. Sunlight paints the walls golden, the kitchen counter worn yet welcoming, a window above the sink opening to the quiet street. Neighbors wave as they pass, carrying baskets of muffins or fresh fruit, offering glimpses of a community that knows names and stories. Nate stands at the threshold, surveying the scene. He notices how different life feels when it is lived in steps rather than milestones, in small acts rather than headlines. Inside, Emily folds tiny clothes, tucking them neatly into drawers labeled with the child's initials. She studies nonprofit administration online, the screen balancing against her knees while the baby naps. Recipes and wisdom flow between her and other mothers in the neighborhood group, tips about sleep schedules, homemade baby food, and soothing techniques fill her mind, while her own ambitions bloom quietly in the spaces once occupied by fear and exhaustion. Nate checks emails briefly, his thumb hovering over the send button for a press release he drafted weeks ago. He pauses, realizing the company's priorities have shifted. Whitaker Holdings now focuses on reliable jobs, community bridges, small grants, and supporting local sports teams. Red carpets are replaced with Little League bleachers. Formal galas give way to Saturday games, where the families he helps can cheer together. He leans back in the chair, feeling a warmth that is not about success but about purpose. The weight of control lightened by the joy of contribution. The baby stirs again, tiny cries punctuating the morning calm. Emily scoops the child into her arms, whispering a soft encouragement. Nate kneels beside her, hand brushing the baby's cheek with care, marveling at the softness and warmth of new life. Each touch, each glance, is a quiet affirmation that the long struggle, the hospital nights, the fear, the distance was worth enduring. Ordinary gestures become sacred, a burp cloth tucked gently, a bottle warmed to the perfect temperature, a small laugh shared between mother and father. Ruth joins them in the living room, her hands busy with a hymn book she brought for the baby. She shows tiny fingers how to clap in rhythm, the baby's hands flailing and catching her cues imperfectly but enthusiastically. Nate watches, a smile breaking across his face as the baby's laughter fills the room, harmonizing with Ruth's gentle singing. The ordinary noise of a home, a kettle whistling, the faint hum of the heater, a bird calling outside becomes a symphony of belonging. Lunch arrives in small, domestic triumphs, pancakes sizzling in a cast-iron skillet, the smell of maple syrup curling into every corner. Nate flips the pancakes carefully, handing the smaller ones to the baby with a soft chuckle. Emily stirs oatmeal, the steam rising in gentle swirls, and sets the table with mismatched dishes, a touch of personality that makes the space home. Plates clatter softly, the baby babbles encouragement, and the scene feels ordinary yet monumental. Each movement is a stitch in the fabric of their new life. Afternoons are spent exploring small neighborhood rituals. River walks become a lesson in attention, noticing the way sunlight shimmers on water, the smell of damp earth, the laughter of children chasing dogs along the path. Nate carries the baby in a sling, Emily trailing behind with a woven basket for collecting shells and pine cones. They speak little, letting the cadence of their steps and the rhythm of the child's breathing guide the day. Ordinary light filters through clouds, casting patterns across faces and grass, a silent witness to the life they are building. Evenings arrive with preparation. The crib is checked, sheets tucked, the baby's nightwear lined up in neat stacks. Nate wipes counters, straightens chairs, and checks the locks on the doors. Emily sits with the baby in her lap, recounting small triumphs, the first independent grasp, the first laugh, the tiny sigh after a feeding. Their words are not declarations, but observations, quietly tethering them to each other and to the fragile wonder of daily life. Family rituals take shape. Saturday pancakes are no longer a chore, they are a celebration. River walks become routine adventures. Porch repairs turn into shared projects of conversation and laughter. Ruth teaches small hymns, and the baby responds, clapping hands imperfectly but with delight. Each repetition cements the ordinary as extraordinary, the mundane as magical. Nate and Emily notice, day by day, how the ordinary rhythm heals old wounds, builds patience, and roots trust where it once faltered. Months blend with simplicity. Nate's presence at Whitaker Holdings is steady, his attention divided between work and home with a balance he never believed possible. Emily's studies progress, her confidence in management and nonprofit administration growing with each completed module. The neighborhood watches, quietly approving, while the family grows into a pattern that is stable, rich in connection and care. Hydrangeas bloom once more outside the front porch, small reminders of the seasons and cycles of life. The day ends softly. Sunlight fades behind rooftops, casting long shadows across pine floors. Emily lays the baby in the crib, tucking the quilt around the small body with meticulous care. Nate switches off the lights in the nursery, placing a hand on the baby monitor briefly before moving to the kitchen. Silence fills the spaces between walls, a quiet companion to the rhythm of ordinary life. It is in these small, repeated actions that healing arrives. Pancakes, walks, laughter, chores, meals, and bedtime rituals all ordinary, all deliberate, all suffused with care. The The twist is not dramatic. It is gentleness itself. The life that once felt unreachable arrives not through spectacle, but through choice, consistency, and attentiveness. Ordinary light becomes a daily miracle. As evening settles over Portsmouth, Emily sets a casserole on the counter. Nate folds a towel. The baby sleeps. The neighborhood glows faintly beyond the windows, and the house hums with a quiet vitality. The next day promises a coastal picnic, sunlight over sand and waves, and hydrangeas framing the child's first memory of happiness. The ordinary has become profound, and the family has found the rhythm that will carry them forward. The lighthouse casts a long shadow over the rocky coastline, its white paint peeling in gentle waves. The family spreads a blanket over the grass, paper plates balanced on laps, a small cooler set just within reach. Sunblock glints on Emily's skin, and Nate checks the straps on the baby carrier one more time, ensuring the child sleeps safely against his chest. The wind carries the scent of salt and sun-warmed sand, and each breath tastes of hope, of ordinary life stitched together with care. Little hands dig into soft sand, leaving fingerprints that quickly vanish with each returning wave. The baby coos softly, stirring in the carrier, toes brushing the edge of the blanket. Nate hands Emily a bottle, their movements quiet and coordinated, as though they have rehearsed 1,000 mornings without ever speaking a word. Laughter drifts over the rocks from children climbing and chasing kites, blending with the distant call of gulls. It is a moment of ordinary perfection, a fragile pause in the long rhythm of their shared history. Emily takes out a stack of thank you notes, small envelopes already filled with baby photos. She writes to the NICU nurses, the ink gliding across paper with a calm deliberation, each stroke carrying gratitude for the hands that held, guided, and preserved. Nate watches her, the sunlight catching the gold band he wears quietly on his finger, the one once belonging to his grandmother. The memory of hospital nights and anxious waiting remains, softened by the brightness of today. But it does not vanish. Each note is a bridge, a way of honoring both memory and forward motion. Hydrangeas, planted weeks ago by little hands, sway in the breeze, petals brushed with drops of early rain. Nate crouches to examine them, fingers brushing the soft stems. He notices how the stone steps of the porch, once cracked and unyielding, have been mended carefully, the mortar smooth beneath his palms. These small acts, ordinary and silent, carry more weight than any contract or boardroom victory ever did. The world teaches lessons not in gold or steel, but in the gentle persistence of care. The tide rises slowly, water lapping against rocks and sand, then retreats, leaving behind shells and seaweed. Nate thinks about walls, how he once built them around himself to keep pain at bay. Those walls succeeded in one way: they kept vulnerability out, but they also muffled laughter, flattened textures of living, and prevented music from reaching the corners of his heart. Emily's quiet strength, her routines and attentions, softened the edges of stone. Tenderness wears more than force ever could. They pause for lunch, sandwiches and fruit spread between them. Emily hums a small tune, one she learned from her mother, and the baby lifts its head, alert, following the sound. Nate smiles, a slow, unforced expression that begins deep in his chest. These are moments that demand no plan, no strategy, only presence. The ordinary paper plates, sand, laughter, bottles, and toes become sacred. After lunch, Nate gathers shells with the baby in tow, while Emily writes another note, this time reflecting on what policies and procedures had taught him. Money buys shelter, but not sheltering. Risk can be managed, but the human heart cannot be budgeted or controlled. Each line of reflection is paired with small action, a folded blanket, a labeled container, a bottle tucked into a bag, thought braided into behavior, conviction braided into care. The sky darkens slightly, hints of drizzle brushing the horizon. The family packs slowly, deliberately, carrying the remnants of their picnic and the laughter that lingers in the pockets of the wind. The lighthouse bell rings faintly, a sonorous reminder that time moves steadily, regardless of how carefully humans arrange their hours. Nate feels the weight of reflection settle on his shoulders, not as burden, but as clarity. He has learned that denying once is insufficient. Life requires affirmation, daily, quietly, without the expectation of recognition. Emily tucks the baby into the carrier one last time before stepping toward the car. Nate adjusts the straps and drapes a small blanket over the child. The rain begins to fall softly. Light taps on the roof of the car and on the lenses of sunglasses Nate carries. He pauses, feeling the cadence of rain as a kind of forgiveness, a rhythm that echoes the patience and persistence he now cultivates in himself. The world outside is damp, wet, and luminous, while inside the car, a different weather takes hold: warmth, protection, and ordinary miracles. The ride home is slow, deliberate. Nate watches Emily in the rearview mirror, hands steady on the wheel, eyes focused on the road, yet gentle in their care. The baby sleeps, small breaths regular, and Nate imagines how these quiet days, these slow and ordinary routines, will become the foundation of memory. He wonders if courage is measured in grand declarations or in the ability to show up again and again, through rain, through fear, through the uncertainty that life invariably brings. They reach the row house in Portsmouth. The front porch glistens with raindrops, the hydrangeas bending under the weight of moisture. Nate carries the baby inside, Emily following with a small bag. Every action is deliberate, ordinary, and yet profound. Shoes removed, blankets folded, bottles warmed, and the quiet rituals of home reasserted. Walls still protect, but the music, laughter, breathing, gentle conversation now travels freely. The evening settles, rain tapping rhythmically against windows, and the family gathers in the living room. The baby sleeps in the back seat nearby, a soft warmth emanating even through the car seat. Nate and Emily share a glance, no words needed, both aware that the smallest gestures, tidy corners, careful hands, notes of gratitude, a planted hydrangea have become the curriculum of the heart. Life's most enduring lessons are rarely spectacular. They arrive in rhythm, repetition, and tenderness. Outside, the tide recedes, waves pulling back to reveal sand and shell. Inside, the ordinary becomes miracle. Tomorrow will bring another day, another rhythm, another ordinary moment that will carry extraordinary meaning. The rain teaches patience. It teaches care. It teaches that love asks for courage, and that courage can be quiet, persistent, and kind. The sun dips low behind the lighthouse. Paper plates are stacked, sandwiches wrapped, and hydrangeas glisten under the final light. Nate folds a blanket over his shoulders. Emily zips the baby carrier. Both know that the work of love, steady, patient, and repeated, will continue, rain or shine. And the miracle, fragile and ordinary, sleeps contentedly in the back seat. Life often teaches us that the strongest walls we build around ourselves, walls meant to protect us, can also isolate us from the very love and connection we need. Nate's journey shows that success and control cannot replace human tenderness, and that vulnerability is not weakness, but a bridge to understanding and healing. Emily's courage reminds us that integrity and steadfastness, even in difficult circumstances, create space for new beginnings and nurture life in ways that money and status never can. The story also emphasizes patience and quiet acts of care: a cup of tea left on a desk, a gentle check-in, a shared moment in the midst of chaos. These gestures may seem ordinary, yet they hold extraordinary power to touch hearts and rebuild trust. Above all, it teaches that love demands both bravery and humility. We must be willing to face our fears, forgive ourselves, and step into uncertainty for the sake of connection. Life's true wealth lies not in material gain, but in the relationships we cultivate, the trust we honor, and the courage we summon to embrace joy, even when it feels risky. In short, the story is a reminder it is never too late to let love in, to mend broken bridges, and to nurture life, both others and our own. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone who might need a little inspiration today, And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that warm the soul and remind us of life's beautiful lessons. Your support means the world.